Hi, everyone. So we're going to get started. Welcome to today's talk, Black New Orleans History, Art, and Narrative, sponsored by Cierra Electric Marronage, Keywords for Black Louisiana, the Space for Creative Black Imagination, and the JHU Center for Africana Studies. My name is Kelsey Moore, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History at Johns Hopkins, as well as an assistant editor for Cierra Electric Marronage and the lead chair for the Mardi Gras, Indian Traditions, Going Global, and Going Online, both of which are Life X Code projects. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panelists and hosts. Cierra Chenier is a writer, creator, and historian born and raised in New Orleans, driven by her love for her city, enabled by Black studies and cultural memory as a native New Orleanian. She created NOIR N NOLA, a digital platform preserving the history, culture, and soul of Black New Orleans. Previous topics included gentrification, a post-Hurricane Katrina, Robert Charles, and the New Orleans Race Riots, Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau, and Maroon leader Jean Saint Malo. She has provided her voice for esteemed creative projects, interviews, and is a resource for Black New Orleans history, thought, and writing. As a 2021 recipient of the Foundation for Louisiana's World Makers Award, Chenier is currently in a research period and working on upcoming projects. Dr. Mona Lisa Saloy is the Louisiana Poet Laureate and an award-winning author and folklorist, educator, and scholar of Creole culture. Currently, the Conrad N. Hilton Endowed Professor of English at Dillard University, Dr. Saloy documents Creole culture in sidewalk songs, jump rope rhymes, and clap hand games to discuss the importance of play. She writes on the significance of the Black beat poets, especially Bob Kaufman, and on the African-American toasting tradition, Black talk, and on Creole, and on keeping Creole today. Her first book, Red Beans and Ricely Yours, won the T.S. Eliot Prize and the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award. Her collection of poems, Second Line Home, captures New Orleans speech and family dynamics, celebrating the unique culture of New Orleans. Saloy's screenplay for the documentary Easter Rock premiered in Paris, the Ethnograph Film Festival, and at the Black Museum. And she's lectured on Black Creole culture at Poets House Cafe, the Smithsonian, Purdue University, and the University of Washington, and Woodland Pattern Book Center. Christina K. Robinson is a writer and visual artist born and raised in New Orleans. Robinson is the co-editor of Mixed Company, a collection of short fiction and visual narratives. Her writing has appeared in Guernica, The Baffler, The Nation, Art in America, NL, among other outlets. She is the 2019 recipient of the Rapkin Prize for Visual Arts and Visual Arts Journalism. She currently serves as the New Orleans editor at large for Burnaway Magazine. And our host, Dr. Jessica Marie Johnson, is an assistant professor in the Department of History at Johns Hopkins University and a fellow at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Studies at Harvard University. She is also the director of Life Code Digital Humanities Against Enclosure. Johnson is a historian of Atlantic slavery and the Atlantic African diaspora. She is the author of Wicked Flesh, Black Women, Intimacy, and Freedom in the Atlantic, which has been awarded the 2020 Kemper and Layla Williams Prize for Louisiana History, the 2020 Rebel Women Lit Caribbean's Reader Award, and the 2021 Wesley Logan Best Book and African Diaspora History Prize from the Association of American Historians, and the 2021 Laura Romero First Book Publication Prize for the American Studies Association. Her work has appeared in Slavery and Abolition, The Black Scholars, Meridian, Feminism, Race, and Transnationalism, American Quarterly, Social Text, the Journal of African American History, the William and Mary Quarterly, Debates in Digital Humanities, and Somatosphere, and colonial digital humanities. So without further ado, I welcome everyone to Black New Orleans History, Art, and Narrative.
Hey folks. So I am incredibly excited to be here and to help try and create space for this amazing conversation. I'm just going to say a few things and I'm going to get out of the way. We hope that there is a lot of robust engagement. We're going to have time for Q&A after the panelists speak. In the meantime, the chat will stay open unless there is some funny business, as in Zoom bombing or trolling, which has happened at our events before, and then we will shut down the chat. So hopefully nobody is here for bad intentions. Everybody's here for good vibes only. So please use the chat with that in mind. But we do have the capacity to shut it down if we have to. The Q&A function also exists as a space to throw your questions out there and queries and all of that. So two different spaces you can engage, but we definitely, we love the call and response and the back and forth. So please do be in the chat, drop where you're coming in from, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to have really short presentations from each of the speakers, these amazing, amazing Black women. And then we are going to have we're going to show some videos and have some, more directed questions and conversation, and then we will open up for discussion. So sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself. We are going to start with Cierra Chenier.
My name is Cierra Chenier. As mentioned, I am a writer, historian, and creator of NOIR N NOLA, which is a digital platform that I created in order to preserve the history, the culture, and the soul of Black New Orleans. And this really came from really just the need to want to preserve a lot of the Black history that and Black culture that I felt was being lost. As we know, so much was lost in Hurricane Katrina, so much has been lost in post-Katrina gentrification. And the question to myself was, how do I create something that, preserves what is still left, but also honors, the things that have gone? Really, this desire came from seeing, neighborhoods change, seeing cultural institutions close, cultural icons passing away, and even just the threat that Black New Orleanians constantly face in what used to be a former slave port. And there are issues that still linger in our city, but New Orleanians, Black New Orleanians specifically have created so much despite of. And NOIR N NOLA was basically my love letter to New Orleans. How do I create a platform that honors that, but also really emphasizes the value of our lives? So through writing articles, through narrations, through different creative visual projects, I really try to elevate the history while also making the connections to the present. And in those conversations, how do we form solutions towards our future? I think that, New Orleans is the past, the present, and the future. And this is so important to just our existence here, and really wanting to create something that not only explains how we've survived and maintained over time, but how do we live full and free lives in the city that is home, and the city that we've created and contributed so much to. So through this, in creating NOIR N NOLA in 2017, I also want to share this reflection that I wrote, and just, thinking about what is Black New Orleans to me? What does that even mean as a Black native New Orleanian? So here I have, to be Black in New Orleans is something that cannot be understood, bought, or imitated. It's the way that we pronounce baby in that thick accent, to the smell of Creole cuisine coming from your mama's kitchen. It's the need to always represent the ward, neighborhood, or housing project you grew up in, and knowing just what to do when you hear cash money taking over for the 99 and the 2000. From holding the late, great Soldier Slim in high regard to our laid-back attitude mixed with Southern charm. It's the tradition of bringing out the brass band to properly send home a loved one. It's the second nature that once you hear the second line music at a party, y'all ain't gotta go home, but y'all gotta get the hell up out of here. It's the usage of before the storm and after the storm as our timestamps. from knowing the difference between being from across the river and from across the canal, to that endless debate of whether that frozen treat is called a huckabuck or a frozen cup. Sometimes it's disasters, it's potholes, and a murder rate that is sometimes as high as the heat index, but it's home. And there ain't nothing like home. As NOIR N NOLA, or Black in New Orleans, we're built different. We carry a certain spirit and resistance that cannot be found anywhere else. It must be something in the water.
Thank you for that. I definitely did a little bounce with 99 for the 2000. That's a generation that's damn near global. Like there's so much there, and it reminds me, and I hope all of us in New Orleans is still the template for so much. We have up next the Reverend Dr. Scholar Assistant Professor Mona Lisa Saloy, the current Louisiana Poet Laureate. It's an honor to have you here. Let me ask you to step up to the stage.
Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here, and so even more gratified to be here with these younger sisters who have picked up the mantle, and it just gives me faith in the next generation. Thank you both. Cierra and Katrina, you guys are jamming. I'm so proud of you and all that you are doing. So it is a great pleasure and honor to be here. And just in terms of, and ditto to everything Cierra said, and I'm from the 7th Ward, as Cierra suggested. We're from the neighborhood or the ward, but we're New Orleans. The great Marcus Garvey tells us that history records that slaves, by virtue of their experiences and knowledge gained in captivity in strange lands, have eventually become masters of themselves. That's the tradition of New Orleans, a tradition of excellence in building trades, fine arts, culinary arts. Soul food is now cuisine, y'all. Music, and a historic intellectual tradition from composer Dédé to Jelly Roll Morton, Joe Jones, to Alan Toussaint, the Fitch family, the Rouzon family, the Castanels, Chocolate Milk, Jermaine Basil in jazz, John Scott in sculpture, to Richard Thomas in painting, Charlie Johnson and Louise Mouton, to Sue Jane Smock, all wonderful painters. And who was the first Black woman to show at the National Gallery at the Smithsonian. From Homer Plessy to A.P. Turo to Royce Duplessis, from Bob Kaufman, the Black Beat poet, to Thomas Covington Dent, who grew up on the campus of Dillon University, to Tyler Perry. We know so much of the Marigny is a 7th Ward, part of Treme, and we even boast a saint in New Orleans, Henriette DeLille. Well, she's on the way. Daughter of one of the oldest families of free people of color in New Orleans, who founded the Sisters of the Holy Family, the 2nd oldest Catholic religious order for women of color. So culture is made by traditions. And that happens in families of, in our case, great neighborhoods. We still have neighborhoods with fine traditions passed on by word of mouth, face to face, generation to generation, literally the definition of folklore. In addition to our great institutions, Dillon University, Ellis Marcellus and Harold Baptiste graduated from there. St. Augustine High School, 3 New Orleans mayors came out of there. 35 former NFL players, actors, musicians, including the current John Baptiste from that night show with the most Grammy nods, right here from the neighborhood. Corpus Christi, Epiphany, St. Raymond Catholic Schools, Valina C. Jones. Then the Autocrat Social and Pleasure Clubs. We have benevolent societies, a tradition from West Africa imported here because we were able to congregate on Sundays, the only city, well, of course, more Blacks were sold from here than anywhere else, but the only city where enslaved Blacks were allowed to congregate on Sundays after worship, and other schools. So we made a way out of no way and flourished in spite of poverty rates before paved streets. We're over 300 years old. And of course, then Katrina, which is not just a historic fact, but a break in our history, interrupting the continuity of our culture, but not ending it. Because we are home, rebuilding still, one porch, one roof, one wall at a time. And we are back on our playgrounds. But especially in my neighborhood, in the 7th Ward, we say, as Garvey continues, we use adversity. We take advantage of every opportunity and let history record that we toiled laboriously and courageously, and we worked to live gloriously. And he said that in 1923. And I just love all that he adds to it. So we every day vow to continue that tradition of excellence. We still provide safe places for our youth to play. We try. And we continue to pass on our warm, generous, good ways and try to live gloriously every day. That's who we are here. And it still exists from one tradition to the other. And so, contrary to popular opinion, there's more churches than bars in New Orleans, is my estimation. So we are, as the African worldview, God, family, community. That is us. And we're so much more alike than we are different all over the world, which always just touches my heart whenever I travel and meet Black folks from other places. So I'll just end my opening with a new poem. It's called 7th Ward Daily Fare, or Black Creole Talk. In the Crescent City, we live in the inside of good luck, the right side of blessings. We pass front steps and porches. We're a giving thanks and praying town. And contrary to popular opinion, there's more churches than bars. Annually, we count the storms missing us. Laugh and thank you, Lord, for another safe season. And in the middle of smiles, we see each other and wish y'all well until we chew fat on the gallery again. Dough popping. Hey, he looks like Uncle Brother. No, he looked like Jesse Hill. Who that? Mr. Upopabadoo himself. Oh, that dude bad, buried in Old Holt Cemetery. What? Potter's Field, you know, no lie, that's Capu, bad luck. Uh-oh, got a step. Need to find a rump to fit and rest my stump. Chew some pecans later, you heard me? Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the grounding and the history, which we're going to get into even more. We have last with our opening remarks, Christina K. Robinson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina K. Robinson. I'm a writer, a poet and a writer, and also a visual artist, and sometimes independent curator. And I look at my own practice so much as an emanation of the collective culture that I come from in New Orleans. So the word that I rest on the most is interdisciplinary. And that's sort of the way that, you know, I see and have experienced our culture in New Orleans, in this sense that we all are called to play multiple roles in our community. So many of us work in multiple genres. So this is something I did that I did post Katrina, and it was sort of an experiment in trying to think about what was left and what was present in the city at the time, and trying to bring together a lot of disparate narratives as sort of a framework to see us through a really ambiguous time in the city, which was this sort of like onslaught of gentrification that was happening at the time. You could skip the next one. And so because of the onslaught of gentrification and just a lot of social change that was happening post-Katrina, I was sort of redirected in my own practice from literary writing to thinking about cultural criticism, which sort of led me to write these things that were more reflective on the present moment and ways in which I saw New Orleans interacting with pop culture at the time. And so this piece, Rhythm, Water, and Global Blackness, it came as a result of interacting with people in the diaspora and seeing so much of myself and New Orleans culture around the world, and wanting to think about what has happened in New Orleans socially, culturally, and politically as a framework for seeing what has happened all over the world and maybe what's to come. I think it had already been said by Cierra that so much of New Orleans is contextualized in the past, but New Orleans is very much a place of the future. So thinking about how our culture and how these events that have happened here serve as sort of foreshadowing in some ways for what may be to come nationally and globally became something I started to think a lot about in my own writing. So this was a show that I independently curated for an artist that was from Sudan. And a lot of his work was sort of silently thinking about this crisis on the Mediterranean where Black migrants were drowning, about 100, sometimes thousands per year. And definitely we connected over this, this vulnerability to water that both groups of Black people were experiencing simultaneously, seemingly so far apart and having nothing to do with one another, but really kind of being driven by really similar forces that were, leaving us vulnerable to death by sea, basically. I have lately been trying to integrate my visual and written practice together, which visually I work a lot with sacred spaces and shrines and sort of recreating these spaces that we all experienced in the domestic sphere growing up, where altars took, formal senses like what you see and informal spaces like in the bedroom, in the kitchen, different places like that. So I recently wrote something kind of about altars and shrines and the role they play in New Orleans. And that's sort of what I'm working on now, is trying to integrate these sort of disparate artistic and literary experiences into something that hopefully is a record. Whatever is to come in New Orleans is a record for our, future descendants to see kind of what we did in this time of, just flux for us in the city. So a project that I hope does what I've explained a few minutes ago in terms of trying to integrate all of these disparate influences is a project that I call Republica, Temple of Color and Sound. And what it is at its core for me is sort of a sacred reflection on the place that existed pre-Katrina in New Orleans. And it plays out through a mythic place that occupies what is present day New Orleans as a free Black territory in North America, kind of a country of its own, which is sort of the experience I had growing up in New Orleans. And I think a lot of us had and weren't really aware of until, it was over, basically. But as Mona Lisa said, we still persist, and we are, actively working at adapting our traditions and preserving our traditions in order for them to survive into the future. So thank you all for having this conversation with us today. I'm really happy to be here with you all. I'm a little emotional. The two openings, they hit me really hard. So I thank two of you all for sharing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're gonna, there's already so much here, and I wanna make sure that we have, the space to hold it all, and the space that folks need. So one of the things we're gonna do is add just even a little bit more to the conversation with just a quick look at some of the work that Cierra has been up to, that we had the pleasure of sharing a little bit of it on Taller Electric Marronage on the website. So we're gonna play that video.
Remember
now.
only packing for 3 days? Cause we just knew we'd be right back. Left on top of roofs and interstates, You had a people governments failed long before them levees did. A whole city traumatized by all that was lived, seen, lost, and survived. Our lives forever split into before the storm and after the storm, while the President of the United States just flew over. They called us refugees in our own country. They say we were criminals in our own city. We didn't forget how nobody wanted anything to do with New Orleans in '05. Didn't want us in their schools and their states. So don't question why we get so defensive over what's ours. We said revitalization, not gentrification. We didn't rebuild this city through hell and high water for you to come make this your blank slate. 'Cause see, the roots run about 300 deep here. So consider that when trying to change the very culture that you moved here for. They were quick to privatize housing, education, but ask the East how long it took for a hospital or a grocery store. We see the remnants of the storm every day, in the displacement of communities and the disinvestment of others, in the trauma that went unchecked, in empty lots and abandoned buildings of what used to be. I couldn't take you to my childhood if I wanted to. 15 years ago, this community was fighting just to live, to survive, here at home. Fighting just to get back home, the only home we ever knew. 15 years to the date, we are still here, in defense of home, in this post-Katrina New Orleans. And I am troubled by what we've been left to inherit.
That, of course, is one of our panelists here today, Cierra's video, and important work. And it seems fitting, like, to kind of bring that into the conversation, and to kind of think with what all of that means. So maybe we could start there, like, Cierra, maybe talk about what motivated this video. I see the 15 years later mark. And maybe in that, we can continue this conversation about, Black New Orleans, about what is, each of you are talking about it in different ways, but also synergistic ways. Like, it's clearly like a unified and a united understanding of the world, a praxis, a way of living, a way of culture. Let's talk about it. If you're willing, Cierra, maybe you could start.
Definitely. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, so really what inspired me to write this was, my observations 15 years post-Katrina. I think a lot of times when we talk about Katrina, when just different entities outside of New Orleans talk about Katrina, it's almost as if, this was this traumatic, catastrophic event in the past that occurred. And, we speak about it in past tense and from 2005, but the Black New Orleanians do not have the luxury to think or speak about Katrina as if it was something past. Like I said in the video, we see the remnants of the storm every day. Our lives are forever split into before the storm, after the storm. We're now, post Hurricane Ida, we're now saying, okay, which storm are you talking about? But this is something that completely shifted the trajectory of a lot of our lives. I said in there, I couldn't take you to my childhood if I wanted to. That shot of that chair in that room was the inside of my old preschool, which actually was founded by Henriette DeLille, as Mona Lisa mentioned, who received a donation from free man of color Tommy LaFawn to fund that LaFawn Child Center. And, there's so many aspects of our New Orleans that are things past at this point, but we still live through the very real effects of Katrina, especially Black neighborhoods such as my own, growing up in New Orleans East, that were hit very hard. And I think it's important to, when we talk about Katrina, and we hate talking about it because it is very traumatic, and a lot of us didn't talk about it to the extent in which we needed to at the time. It's something that, New Orleanians have always been labeled as resilient, which we are. But I think that we really need to bring to the forefront, the conditions that cause us to be so. And Katrina, I don't think we'll ever have the luxury of not talking about Katrina. And I think in order to, live free, as I mentioned, or, have a better quality of life for Black New Orleanians, we have to acknowledge, everything that went down with that storm leading up to it and following. Because I think oftentimes when Katrina is talked about an event of the past, it glosses over the very real impacts that we're living in now, which is the post-Katrina displacement and gentrification. The fact that so many Black New Orleanians were not even able to return back. I'm grateful to be Black still in New Orleans, that although I couldn't return back to my house in my neighborhood, I'm still in my city, which a lot of people didn't have that luxury. But as we see so many, especially non-white New Orleanians are able to come to New Orleans and, live a full, free life, enjoy all of the aspects of the culture. But, there are so many of us that are, still struggling and dealing with the very real impacts of Katrina. And, I think that is something we'll always have to talk about and have a very real, honest conversation about.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that. Thank you for those cogent comments there. They really struck home for me. And I'm in my home, but it took 16 moves and 14 and a half years and 12 different addresses.
Right.
And I'm not the only one.
Right.
And people are still trying to get back. And the sad thing is, our parents and grandparents paid for levees so strong that the Dutch hold back the North Sea with our levee design. But our levees broke and caused what we now call the federal flood, a flood that could have been avoided if the Army Corps of Engineers had not built cheaper, shorter levees than was agreed, designed, as safest, and paid for. This is the crushing thing, in addition to the displacement, to the fact that insurance companies stiffed us. My sister calls insurance extortion. And they stiffed us, and again, on every storm, not just Katrina, but Katrina was the main one because so many of us lost everything. But we still keep our food, our music, our traditions, and they are world renowned, and we're thankful for that. But as the sign said, and I don't know if it was you, Cierra, or Christina, who captured that in a photo, what people love about New Orleans, it comes from Black people, because we kept who we are. And the welcomeness, when you go to West Africa, Akwaba, welcome. New Orleans is like that. Everybody's welcome. You can have a wonderful conversation with a total stranger and never see him again. And you guys have traveled, you go to the North, people look past you. And Black people forgotten where they come from sometimes. But we remain an international community, which is a legacy of our geography and colonial development. But it's our African retentions that give us all that joy and all those beautiful traditions that everybody loves. And unfortunately, our literacy rate is still twice the national average. And in my neighborhood, 4 times the national average. And too many families still have no internet access at home. And then because of the pandemic, the libraries are closed. So people used to go to the libraries and use the public computers. And now hopefully some of that is coming back, because some people are out of touch. And so imagine the young families with kids who may not afford computers at home. So this is a real issue. But we're still here, and we are blessed, and we're still masking, still making music, still giving rock and gospel services on Sunday worship, and we're still have our family and our friends.
I was looking, I think after Ida, and when I was applying, doing the whole FEMA thing, it took me to this dashboard that listed all of the disasters I had applied for. Right? And it was a really devastating moment, right? Because you know, of course we were in this like really strange situation of having Ida happen the same day as Katrina, which I think we all just had to just almost delete in a sense, because that was just crazy that we would go through that and then it would be that day, right? So when I logged in and I see this list of disasters, that memory was triggered by something Cierra said in the video about this absence of a childhood, right? And something you said too about the different addresses, and then the critical part of not being the only one. And so I think that was something that in that 15 years, or that 16 years now since, that was the thing you would always be trying in some senses to get people to understand that this didn't just happen to me. This happened to everybody all at one time. So that what you do in a crisis is turn to your family, friends, community, but we were all in this same situation. And I think that experience that we had together is something that it's obviously something that's heavy for all of us, but I do think as we head into a really sort of uncertain future, I do think that we learn something together, like really profound, like in whatever way that we experienced that disaster, there's a blueprint for the bottom falling out that we experienced. Like just the absence of everything you have ever known, the collapse of all stability, so much in work with other like diasporas, feeling this kinship because they understood, because they had experienced war, that what we had experienced was like a war level conflict. Hundreds of thousands of people moved out of one place in an instant, and 100,000 never come back. Like that's a psychic loss, you know, that is on that level of a war conflict. And so I do think that, you know, I don't know, I just think that there's something, not that that's something to look forward to in any way, but, you know, we see the things that we're looking at in this country, whether it's political or even environmental. And I do think we have some sort of a framework for what to do for each other. You know, that's what I've been able to find, at least, you know, out of things we've all experienced in the last like 15, 16 years. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I think is so clear in all of your remarks together is the positioning of Katrina, of the storm, in the narrative that is Black New Orleans, and the history that is Black New Orleans, and in the art that is Black New Orleans. And it's definitely a different positioning from when you're outside of the city, or even outside of Louisiana, outside the Gulf Coast. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and why some of that is. What is the dissonance? What are folks missing when they talk about Katrina and they don't have that grounding that you all have in the space, in the time, and in Black life?
Well, certainly, as like my other sisters experienced this, number one, people perceived it as just another Black town. And, oh, they don't have to bring it back. Well, nobody said that about New Jersey or New York when the storms hit there. You cannot outrun natural disasters. And there are things that should be literally many things that could be done to prepare and to prevent such disasters. Sometimes you can't, but nobody suggested that New York City be closed down and ditched, or New Jersey. When those rich families on the Jersey shore were flooded and devastated, and there was so much instant, and God, look, we know how it feels. So we were empathetic. What did we do? What little we had, we said stuff. We sent food, we sent money, we supported people. But hey, we were left on our own with nothing. And so that's America. Because we were a Black city, we were expendable. We could be easily ditched. Just like if you're stopped on the street, oh, you must be doing wrong. It's the assumptions. Mm-hmm. And that's not a microaggression. That's a wholehearted American privilege assumption. And that's what has to stop. But here is the same America who doesn't want the truth about its history taught in the schools. Okay, I'm gonna shut up.
I think definitely to Dr. Mona Lisa's points, it's like, I think across the board, the disconnect is that people just tend to have this very extractive relationship with New Orleans. This idea that you can you can come to New Orleans, be whoever you want to be, and go on Bourbon Street and celebrate and, be somebody outside of yourself. But there's just this forgotten aspect of, who keeps the show going, who paved the roads that you're walking on, and that pretty ironwork in the French Quarter that you see, and drain the levees that allowed for the city to even exist. And I think when it comes to Katrina, because of that narrative that people have about New Orleans, it was almost this thing of, almost this complex of, especially now, you see that this constant need to wanting to tell Black New Orleanians who we are, to speak for us, to speak on us. We are not in many spaces seen as the experts of our own stories. And, we saw how Black New Orleanians were depicted in throughout Katrina and a lot of the news and media coverage. And even 16 years plus since, we see New Orleans spoken about almost in the way of, if you almost spoken about in a way that we needed saving, or, we need people to save us from ourselves, or we don't know what's best for us. And I think it all just stems back to that extractive relationship that people have with the city. And, it's at the expense of Black New Orleans, and especially poor Black New Orleans. And I think we're in a period of time where it's like, across the board, we're just kind of frustrated with that. And you see this resurgence of people who do work like Dr. Mona Lisa and like Christina and myself, that, we are controlling that narrative and saying, no, you're not going to tell us about us, especially because of Katrina and what we've seen in the years following.
I think a lot of, sort of that disconnect came from, I think I experienced it a lot during Ida, or at least I was kind of reliving certain experiences during Ida, right? So it was disconnect between thinking about, or I'm seeing, or I'm just, I'm evacuated. So I'm scrolling and I'm looking at all of these conversations that are about, the environment and climate change, and, how climate change is interacting with the arts and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, I'm a writer and an artist who's, currently evacuated because of a climate crisis. And now we're put into this position where we used to evacuate once a summer, every other summer. And now we're in this position where we're having to leave multiple times. And it's the struggle to just sustain, even in comfortable circumstances, so imagine what this is like for the most vulnerable populations in the city, right? But this disconnect between sort of a theoretical reality versus a sort of a lived reality, right? And I think that we've been kind of in this sort of struggle to define our own narrative in the world, and creating spaces where we are the authors of our story, and consider the authors not just the source material. We have this as people, because New Orleans and Louisiana has this relationship to the rest of the US, where it's source material, it's being extracted from, so do the, the citizens as well experience that. And I think that that's something that I was really, really taking in a lot during Ida, since it felt like this, replay loop. And we were so thinking, focused on the water, that when we didn't flood, we didn't even consider that the electrical grid would float away and we'd be gone. I was gone, a month and a half, right? And just what that kind of disruption, does for, just your daily life processes. I think that there's a disconnect there that people don't exactly understand. And I try to understand that some things are kind of beyond human comprehension until you experience them, which is why I do look at the city so much as a blueprint, because we could see nobody thought when Ida happened that what would happen in New York a week later would happen. And it did. So this idea that it's only happening to us and we're just tucked away down here and nobody else has to worry about it, and you can just take the money and run, in a sense, just kind of like, not quietly, but a lot of us are like loudly, saying like, that's not really going to work, like Mona Lisa said, you can't outrun natural disasters. So, there's a lot to be learned, or a lot to be taken from what we've all experienced, in these years since that disaster.
Thank you. So much to learn and to think about there, especially for those of us who are not in the city or blood bound to the city in the ways that that each of you are. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those narratives, those language, those life ways with some of the work of Mona Lisa Saloy. Let's experience some of that.
This first poem is called Word Works, and it's from my first book, Red Beans and Rice, the Yours. Word Works. I'm about how words work up a gumbo of culture, stamped and certified African, delivered on Southern American soil. In my word house, we spit out articles and prepositions like bitter chewing tobacco. We lean on words that paint pictures of gallate and grits and good times, sitting under gallery shades, sipping lemonade, wearing the afternoon like a new dress. This, my birthright, gives a sense of place that gets under your skin, like a swamp leech or a good story out for blood. The region gives you toast or beignets with jam. The rhythm and blues, jazz, and reggae rhythms spice Saturday night suppers and street parades, when the Grand Marshal leads the second line after a funeral or any good excuse to party where umbrellas dance. Folks all colored from pale and yellow to midnight blue-black never just stand back and watch. They're gonna say it, how they see it, how they feel about everything and then some. From roaches to do-rags, from Daddy Do-Right to David Ku Klux Duke, to sisters ringing the barest budget for another meal. So here's a taste, begun in a roux, sauteed in lines like this. Trust a man as far as you can see him, because stiff stuff don't have no conscience, Sister Sarah said. She had 9 kids and 3 grandkids, didn't look a day over 40, said she was preserved because she left the fun box in and took the trouble box out. Then Abear cut in from the curb. Fun was all he heard. Said he was the women's pet, the sissy's regret, and the whore's lollipop. So Sister Sarah said, well, pass the bread, because that's baloney for true. So call this a Crescent City mambo of days in peopled streets, or nights in low-lighted clubs, on boulevards where passers-by pale and bloom like days-old irises or azaleas. The places where neighborhood front porches and side galleries stand vigil for tall talkers and pass-the-time rappers. Here in my house, a Crescent City mambo in words.
Dr. Saloy, come on now. Come on now. This is that work. This is that work. You know, because it's important, I feel like, to really highlight the ways that New Orleans is the blueprint. I love it when you say this, Christina. And also, there are, you know, particular things that are part of the culture, you know, that as Cierra is saying, you know, get extracted and, you know, remixed in all kinds of ways that pull it out of its context. But the work that each of you are doing, and you can hear it in this poem, is also about the particularities. So can we talk about maybe some of the myths and legends that, you know, you all are keeping charge of, continuing to bring to the forefront, but also maybe some that you're fighting that are about, you know, how Black New Orleans is seen, whether within the New Orleans context or even outside. So,
okay, age before beauty. So I'm gonna jump in deep water and swim. Okay, I can say that just being Southern, Black and Southern, even though the great Blacks in the North are just a generation removed, if not first generation Southern, because people left because they had to at the end of enslavement, before enslavement was over. The Great Migration is real. And that created the chocolate cities of the North and the East and the West. And certainly we have all that in common, because the director of the Words and Music Festival, Megan Holt, asked me, she said, well, your work is so peculiar to New Orleans. Do people get it other places? Yeah, they do. There's some things about that being Southern life, but being Black and Southern, that is so special that people recognize it. And from the food to the music, they say, if you've heard a drummer from New Orleans, you know it. So it's embedded in us. But what happens is there's also, as Cierra and both Christina suggested, a disconnect and number one, an appropriation, because everybody lifts it. Everybody wants to be us. And they come here and try to be. I've known young whites who tried to pass for Black blues musicians or Black poets. Really? Really? Okay, passing for Black Creole, really? But in the larger scheme of things, there's a contention, because we are Black and Southern. Oh, you Black and Southern, so you must be the leftovers. You must be not all that, even though we built the wealth of this country. Hello. Sugar was the white gold for Europe and the rest of America. Cotton too. Hello. So it's unfortunate, but we get short shrift. And that's why those of us in doing this work, artistic narrative, you name it, as these beautiful women and brilliant women just said, we are controlling our narrative. It's always been his story. And no longer, it is our story. And I'm going to shut up and let y'all take it.
No, I do think we're in an important moment in terms of like Black New Orleans culture, particularly, you know, since the storm, when we've lost a lot of people. You know, I was thinking the other day, even just during, you know, COVID, we lost a lot of people, you know, who were these cornerstones in the culture or cornerstones in neighborhood culture. Even if people outside the city didn't know who they were, we knew how important they were to keeping the fabric of everything together, right? And so I think because with some of that loss, I don't know, and also too, maybe a factor of timing. You know, a lot of us who experienced Katrina are coming of age. We have perspective on what happened now. And so there's just so much, you know, more to come in terms of people contextualizing for others, you know, what has happened and what the worth of the contribution of the culture is. And I think that not that extractive thing probably is never going to stop, But I do think that we've sort of been operating in sort of like an illusion that like, oh, there's nobody else talking about these things. And we can pretend like we don't see that these people in New Orleans are contributing to the narrative around themselves and their own history. But I think that's getting harder and harder to do, I think. And so I do think that there's, it's going to be a conversation, if minimum, you know what I mean, in terms of what the story of this place is. Nobody's going to be able to just say it and say it unchecked. There is a counter narrative. And I think we're working so hard, to preserve just that counter narrative. Like whatever happens, we left a record, just like the people who came before us, they left a record to let us know how they really felt. We want to know how our ancestors felt about enslavement. We know how they felt because they revolted. They left these things behind. So I think we're trying to do that, I think, too, a lot right now.
I think I agree with everything both Christina and Dr. Mona Lisa just said, just, combating this existing narrative of who we are and constantly having to combat that through the work. Another thing that comes in mind to your question, Jessica, around like the myths and legends that we constantly fight, for me in my work, is that of Marie Laveau. And I'm sure, Christina, you got some thoughts on this too, but being on a call right now with amongst other Black women, she immediately comes to mind. You think about how many Hollywood depictions there have been, books and articles and the lies told with the tour guides in the French Quarter and, white writers over time who have called her everything but a child of God. And yet she was in that cathedral every Sunday, but that's left out. And right. You think about how often the work of Marie Laveau has been deemed as some myth or as a folklore. And I think that really minimizes the impact that she had, a lot of it having to do with just the demonization of voodoo and an African-based religion. There's never been a push to get a monument named after Marie Laveau, but that's who you immediately think of when people.
All right, now we got to make that happen.
Exactly.
I love it. It's overdue. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Keep talking.
But that's the first name that people think of when they start talking about haunted history, and when they start talking about Halloween and the French Quarter. And I really think it all just boils down to the fact that people cannot believe or cannot accept that a Black woman in 19th century New Orleans did what she was able to do at the period of time of what she did it. So it had to be mythology, it had to be folklore. Like, it's very interesting in doing history and telling stories of history, seeing how different historical figures are spoken about or referenced or in other people's work. So it's something that I've tried to be even more so intentional about in debunking in all of my work. I'm a weave Marie in there some kind of way, because I think that so much of her life in those, nearly 80 years encompasses so much of Black New Orleans history. She lifespanned across slavery and free people of color and yellow fever and war and all kinds of stuff happened within her lifetime. And I think it's interesting in a very negative way to see how a Black woman who rose to prominence in the way that she did is remembered in such a way that it just has to be mythology or has to be folklore.
Yeah, I think a lot of the way the way popular culture thinks about Marie, I think is it's sort of metaphorical for a way that a lot of Black women in New Orleans who work in the sphere of the arts or culture, literature, history, we fight against this desire to exoticize and minimize, right? So this idea that Marie Laveau and Henriette Delille are contemporary women, and they're doing these powerful things in the city. And that Marie Laveau is a serious figure, I always tell people she was a nurse. And she wasn't a nurse in the modern world. She's a nurse in 19th century New Orleans. So she's, she's in the trenches, in terms of what that calls for as a person. But of course, she's mostly seen through this exoticized and then therefore minimized lens. But the way in which I feel Black women in New Orleans, because we come from this sort of syncretic, Southern, trans-Caribbean sort of culture, definitely, of course, take pride in the adornment, so that's why you see our culture and so many things of this intricate beadwork, these beautiful things to look at, but there's a thinking behind those aesthetics, right? Like aesthetics are the thing you see, but there's a set of principles that determine why the thing you're looking at looks the way it does. So when you see these presentations, there's so much more than the surface, right? And I think somebody like Marie, she embodies this thing that we're sort of always struggling with sometimes, because we know the deep thinking and the culture and the practice and the dedication that it takes to do these things that people get to take in publicly. But of course, then you're an object of entertainment for people. But we've never acquiesced to that enough to stop doing it, which is, I think, amazing, because there's a lot of pressure, especially in America, to conform to something that is like respectable, that everybody recognizes as intellectual or whatever your, path is. But the fact that we really do kind of resist against that we can be all of these things, I think is something that she really exemplifies, that she was all these things and they were like all true. I think that's why we're so passionate about her here, we're so passionate about her.
And just to add to that, thank you. Just to add to that, I lost my memory when I was young, literally for a couple of years, and I wrote to remember. And one of the first stories I wrote about was Marie Laveau, because she loomed so large in my creative imagination. And it took me years to understand that. And I'm happy to say that my poem on her was published in the Black Scholar. But the important thing to me was to reclaim her truth,
right,
and to honor her legacy. Which was, she was an activist.
Right.
She was independent. She was an entrepreneur. She helped people. She cured people. She was just so larger than life. And coming up, her stories were passed down in such a positive way. And so we know the truth about her, our truth about her. It's just that, as you both suggested, other people appropriate that and make it Hollywood or Disneyland. And it's so far from what actually occurred with her that it's not even simplified. It's just washed away, her truth. And so I'm thankful that all of us have a connection to her. But Marie Laveau Boulevard, where will that be? I love that. That's got to happen, y'all. Count me there. We gonna light some candles. We gonna do some jambalaya. Yeah, Mamselle Marie.
We got a cousin Ariette DeLille. Now it's time for Marie.
Right.
It's really amazing, Cierra. Thank you for that, because I don't think I realized that there is nothing like that for Marie Laveau. Right. And it's true. That's definitely a figure that folks beyond the city recognize. So it seems like an optimal figure, but for all the reasons you guys say, like that has been sort of, just kind of walk around that history officially. So lots to think about there when we're thinking about history and memory, which we will get into after this video by our Christina K. Robinson, our guest.
you live in America, chances are you've never heard of my country. I come from a place called Republica. Republica is a free black republic established on the shores of the Mississippi in 1811, following what you might have heard referred to as the German Coast Rebellion.
Christina. So, one of the things we definitely want to make sure that we ask in the battles that y'all are fighting, why choose the tools that you're using? Why the mediums? Why the genres? And I want to, throw back to what Christina was saying about being multi-genre, and even this last conversation about Marie Laveau, like not being any one thing and just saying, binaries are not going to be where I live or where I ascribe to. Why the mediums that you chose? Why'd you pick up the tools that you chose to pick up to do this work?
So I come from like a literary background. That's what I went to school to do. I taught briefly at Dillard, which I loved. I taught at Xavier for a little while. I had some experiences, I think, in the world in terms of interacting with people in the diaspora who didn't speak the same language as me, but that I connected really deeply to in these sort of like just real kind of unspoken ways. We had experienced some of the same things. We could see ourselves in each other's culture, but we couldn't read each other's work. And so I wanted to try to experiment with like storytelling and theater and things that exist outside the page as a support to, my own work, or thinking about like having an idea and traveling that idea through many different mediums so that it can reach people the way it needs to. And so when I was thinking about this project of trying to think about like what this Gulf Coast would have been like had it been free from 1811 forward, or even what this place was like pre-2005, before we had like a lot of these outside eyes to tell us what to do and how we should do it. Because those kind of timelines are working together for me. It just felt natural that it should happen in life, and that I would try to tell the story over the course of time, however long that took, in these things that you could see in real life. So that maybe even if you don't understand English, you can get something from what's being shown. And so like borders and crossing borders and trying to supersede borders and things like that, that's something I'm always thinking about. And so that kind of took me off of just the page. Because you can listen to something in another language orally and still like receive the emotion, even the point, the crux of the thing, even if you didn't understand a word. And so I'm always fascinated with like that kind of thing, because I feel like our ancestors used that so much, because they spoke different languages and they had different experiences, and how they were able to organize revolt across all of these different social political categories that they inhabited is fascinating to me. So I know they did it a lot through, the body and experimenting with things that aren't confined. So that's kind of why I started doing with sound, not playing with sound a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Other folks, I have called Cierra a Black digital practice practitioner or something along those lines. So there's also that aspect of the digital that has been, and social media that's so present in so much of your work, both of your work as well.
I think definitely that digital realm became a tool because of the sense of urgency. I think that, you know, I always had this interest in me, you know, it was always knowing these Black New Orleans histories at home, and, you know, really enjoyed writing, especially in undergrad. And I remember like my parents asking me one time in undergrad, it was like, okay, so what are you passionate about? I was like, Black people in New Orleans. And they're like, okay, well, what you gonna do with that? So, you know, years later, I figured out what I wanted to do with that. It was, you know, it came from, I felt like so much of Black New Orleans that meant a lot to me was slipping away. And it was almost that I needed to create something that, of course, would not solve a problem overnight or halt these things overnight, but what did I have at my immediate disposal to try and hold on to, preserve, and at least contribute something to my city? And that was NOIR N NOLA. It was literally that week, made a logo, bought a website domain, and just started writing. And it was a lot of emphasis on writing how I talk. That was so important to me because I can't tell you how many times I may have read something or heard something, and it was very clear that the text was not intended for me. And a lot of times in research, which I'm sure many of you have come across as well, you have to peel apart certain language, racist, dehumanizing language, a lot of times to get to the truth of something. And I wanted what I was sharing to be very clear to the audience that I was trying to reach, which was Black New Orleans, especially young Black New Orleans. So I was creating something that told our forgotten stories, but I wanted to really emphasize the values of our lives and sharing, you know, what we have survived, what we have contributed, what we still have, how far we still have to go. But it was definitely a way of, you know, it started out as self-publishing. It was before I had ever pitched a story or freelance anywhere else, because at that time I felt like there wasn't a platform that existed in the way that I needed it to. So I had to make my own. I didn't really, I don't know, I just felt like I had such a sense of urgency. I didn't have time to really pitch a story, wait on responses. I didn't want what I had to say to go through an editor at the time. I didn't want what I had to say to follow a particular writing style. I just needed a medium at my disposal to get that research, but also my historical analysis off of my chest and immediately to those that it was intended for. And through social media, being able to really even more so directly, you know, channel that and reach the people that was intended for. And now in a place years later to where it's, you know, more formalized, and, you know, I've expanded to like narrations and different like creative, like visual projects as well. But I'd say the root of NOIR N NOLA was really just me having to express myself right away, because I felt that I had to reach the people that I wanted to reach in a way that was receptive, in a way that really resonated with who we are. You know, you may read an article that I've written, especially further back, that you might come across a word or a saying or a sentence as like, what does that even mean? But I promise you, Black New Orleans will know. And a lot of that is very intentional in who I'm speaking to.
I think that's a really important point in terms of something that it makes me think about something I was asked earlier, and things that we're fighting for. You know, so many times we're fighting just for the legitimacy of our own voices, you know, and I think that's why sound also became important to me. And Cierracism, it really triggered me to think about that, because I don't know, just in my own personal experience, and I know others can relate to it, just the fact that we carry this voice that we have, like we have an accent. We have an accent that is sometimes not even understood as an American Southern accent. So even when it's within the landscape of the North-South divide in America, where we know Southern accents are like, you know, lower on the totem pole or something, ours comes in even like under that, you know. And so we, a lot of times, you know, we, or at least I know I have battled for the legitimacy around my voice. And that this voice isn't a voice that is an authoritative voice. This accent doesn't signal that I don't know anything, and it is read that way a lot in the US. The one pleasant experience I had leaving the US, I loved my voice. I love it at home, but it was met with a lot of, going through school and things like that. It's difficult, but experiencing how the diaspora experienced my voice really was very healing to me, and so I think that that's something like major, that we're always, and I think everybody does that work here, where we include those things that's a part of our vernacular, because they deserve to survive. They carry so much information and so much history in the vernacular.
Our language. It's literally our language.
Our language,
Yeah.
And so we can't lose that vernacular because we lose so much of our experience,
Yeah. It's interesting to me that you say, Cierra, that you and the digital, I did that too, but largely to survive. I went to print, I was doing broadsides and literally a poetry poster because I could sell it. So I never did a reeling where I couldn't make any money because in those days, they weren't paying people to read poetry. And so I would have something to sell. So my first book is literally a chapbook that I produced. And that was going for $80 on Amazon, baby. So I'm thankful for that. But and now with social media, oh my God, this is there's so much more you can do. And that's why I went into film. I do documentaries, and I haven't done experimental stuff so much because I'm still trying to tell our stories. There's so many to be told. So I'm doing what I can. My experience with the Easter Rock, that ring shout, Black women's Easter vigil is, I was just so honored to do the screenplay for that. It wasn't my research, but guess what? To be able to do, and I write in every genre, and I'm published or presented in every genre. And so that I did that to survive our stories. It's always been about the work, less about the form, but using a form that was natural to whatever I was trying to get across. And so I see in my future more film work and screenplays in that respect. And you guys are so beautiful just to see y'all. Look, hey, keep doing it. But that just, to me, the more forms you can deliver, the more we can get the story out there, especially now.
Right.
So I'm in the process, soon as the last grades are in, I'm going to redo my website, which is way overdue. And I'm finishing a collection of poems. I have a collection of essays on Black Creole culture in New Orleans that's coming, and a biography on Kaufman. And those are works in progress now, but then I have new work that's coming too. So the form is just about delivering the story and whatever works best for that thing for me.
Yeah, right. I think we have such a tradition of people responding to that and taking on that like challenge of knowing what the form that's necessary and, just meeting its requirements. I think that's something you see in so many of our artists from New Orleans, this, multi-genre praxis. Yeah.
And people love my audiobook because they want to be spoken to. They love that. And so I'm thankful for it. Thankful for all the mediums.
So just a final question, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. We've got questions in the box. But I know there are a lot of people in the room who are very much understand themselves to be historians. I understand each of you to be historians as well. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the role, like what is history? That's a good question. And what role does history play in how, in the work that you're doing around Black New Orleans? I'll leave it super open so that y'all can go wherever it makes sense to you.
Okay, may I? Because I'm the one that's not the official historian, but I can tell you that, number one, as we've all attested to, it is no longer his story. And that we are reclaiming who we are. Not that we ever disappeared, but we want the record to show Not just that we were here, but how we were here and how we do it so well and have continued to do well, as Garvey suggests. And I've seen that throughout the diaspora, whether it's in the mother fatherland, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Caribbean or South America. We have persisted. We have created such beauty wherever we land. We are Blacknificence, for lack of a better word. And we need to honor that. And that's what I think we're all trying to do. But in terms of that, our art, in terms of what I try to create, I'm really just honoring my ancestors and my family and my community, because I see so much wealth in them, so much that is not understood. And so I'm trying to do my part in documenting and clarifying, whether it's sidewalk songs, jump rope rhymes, clap hand games, the dozens, whether it's the beating, whether it's the foodways, or the stories, or the jokes. Oh my God, the humor. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, the neighborhood brothers who just have so much wisdom. Even my cousin Dwight, he was getting over cancer, and he's cancer of the lung. He's a singer and a pianist and a composer. And he went to his doctor, and his doctor said, man, he said, your pants are too tight. He said, what pants? He said, they're not tight. He said, that's the OD. It's just, they have a way of just taking the hard things of life and making you smile. They always have a word that is encouraging, and it's not the professors, it's the people on the street, it's the brothers who gave us the poetry, that give us the music, that give us the melody. They are so creative. So, okay, I'm gonna shut up.
I think for me, the way history interacts in my work is sort of like it's the house I'm living in a sense, like I'm living in this historical house, and I got to deal with all that it comes with, it's beautiful, it's all of these things, but then it's like, it's hard to fix, or, it requires things that's hard to come by in the modern world or whatever. So I think about so much like this way that we interact with time in New Orleans, and how we are living in these simultaneous states, kind of past, present, and future. So a lot of my work, even when I was teaching, I taught ancient literature, and it was so much of the big hump with students was, it just, everybody has always been human. It's just, this is a long time ago, right? And so much of my work is about thinking about how my presence today is so like deeply connected to these decisions that people made in the past, right? Or like just the idea that I'm here because I had an ancestor who survived the Middle Passage. Like, well, I'm here. Or I'm here because I had an ancestor who took in a runaway. Like these decisions that people made to survive together are the reasons why we're here. And so for me, history is just this house I'm living in, this body I'm living in, and understanding how you interact with the rest of the world when you are read through the lens of history, even while you are a living, breathing thing, like we're treated like artifacts, you know what I mean? And so how do you personify yourself? I think so much of us, like we're in this practice of just leaving this record of, like Melissa said, not just that we were here, but how we were here, that we weren't just these frozen objects in time with stories written about us. I think it's going to be, they have to do a lot of work, I think, to undo all of what I think is to come out of New Orleans. I think particularly even as this generation that experienced Katrina as children matures. I was a young adult. And so I'm always so blown away when I interact with people who are younger than me in New Orleans, right? And, you know, they tell me that story of how they almost drowned as a child, you know, and I'm like, damn, you were a baby, you know, and I was a young adult. So it's like, I could move around, make my own decisions. And so I'm just so proud of everybody and what I know, like that we're leaving behind and what I know is coming ahead, wherever we land, you know, kind of in the world, you know. I think that, you know, our ancestors laid such a foundation for us, you know, we just like have to tap in, you know, and that's why we're able, I think, to continue to, you know, just continue, you know, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that history in so many ways is the answer. It's, you know, the guide, the curriculum that we have. It's who we are our history, whether we like it or not. It's something that we always have to refer back to. I think about what James Baldwin said of like, you think your pain and your heartbreak is unprecedented in the history of the world, and then you read. And that's something that I constantly keep in the back of my mind, just thinking about Black New Orleans history specifically. I'm just so inspired by, you know, as Christina mentioned, like our ancestors, and thinking about how so many people throughout history who were exactly who they needed to be at the periods of time in which they existed, that first of all allowed for us to even be here. But, you know, it's something that I constantly refer back to, especially as we face very trying times in New Orleans, because when you think about, we've endured slavery and disaster and epidemic, you know, these are things that some things still exist that we're still dealing with, but it's not anything new to us. And history is always that guide we're able to refer back to. And, you know, what did we do then? What should we do differently now? How have things changed? Maybe not at all. And I think that when you think back to Black New Orleans history, there's just so much of who we are that just cannot be understood by documents and by textual research alone. Because, you know, history for me is a connection to the soil. I feel so enabled to be able to tell stories of history in a very non-traditional way because of the connection I have to the place in which I am. You know, been in New Orleans for a very long time, been in Louisiana even longer. And I think that is a tool in the research and tool in telling history, and doing so that, you know, very much, you know, controls that narrative, but also in a way that I can't really separate myself from this. So what I've been doing simultaneously with, you know, researching Black New Orleans history is also, you know, looking into family history. How do I fit into the timeline of which I'm studying? And I think there's even more of an intentionality around the work that we're doing when you're able to place yourself in it. You know, you can't just say anything about Black New Orleans because you're talking about your people, you're talking about yourself. And I think history is just so crucial to just understanding who we are and really being able to narrate those stories in that way.
The gentrification is happening everywhere, but it's interesting to me that in a place where people visit and love the music that we create, but yet they get annoyed if a kid is walking down the street playing the drums or practicing on his trumpet because the house is too small and he's got to do that outside. Or you see somebody cutting grass and you just make assumptions about them. And one of my neighbor's dear friends, Mr. Northern Stovall, they called him loquacious. And sometimes he'd look sad and he'd act like he was having a heart attack. And you just grab him, you say, what's wrong? He says, do you have indigestion? Can I help you? He said, no, indeed, I'm having a CRS moment. I said, what is that? And he says, can't remember stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that lifts you out of every day. Here's another one. He said, what you doing, Mr. Stovall? He's working hard. He's been pulling weeds all day and cutting grass for people. And he's retired, but he helps the elders. And they say, well, I'm minimum wage. And I say, hush now, Mr. Retired. And he said, you see, sometimes I get paid and sometimes I don't. So it's that humor too, and the way we look at life that is often overlooked, that is not going to be in a history book, but It's there. It's there every day. It's la joie de vivre ain't no joke. The joy of life. We, as Amira Baraka says, we have it. We has it.
Mhm. We have a couple of questions, but before we even go into them, I just want to thank you all for this conversation. And I will thank you again before we close, but just being able to listen to y'all and hear y'all and see y'all, hold space for each other and just hold space for your city and hold down your city. It's amazing, and it's something that I know everybody in the room is learning from, and I'm always learning from as well. But we do have some questions, so I didn't pull Kelsey down to come hang out with us.
So there's a question in the chat, and they would like to know, what is the role of spirituality and spiritual practices in your artistic practice that have allowed you to heal from traumas like Katrina and in Black liberation and organizing?
I mean, spirituality plays a big role in my writing and in my artwork. And it plays a big role in just our culture in New Orleans. However, whatever your level of engagement with it is, you don't miss it because it's, it's ubiquitous in the city. For me, I look at spirituality in New Orleans a lot as something that people don't necessarily think of a lot as an organizing or liberatory tool in the context of like activism. But it truly is, it's one of the first things or one of the most brilliant things that's invented in sense in the New World. I mean, it, of course, roots in the continent, but the traditions adapt. People find themselves with people from multiple different places, and they syncretize these traditions in a way that works for the group. And it's just brilliant, that also organizing these, feast days and all of these things that bring everybody together in one spot on one accord. I think that it's just an amazing framework. And then in New Orleans, we have so many manifestations of it kind of beyond just belief. We take it into its physical form, so that like the second line is fun, but that's sacred, that's a sacred practice, and everybody doesn't have to walk in super conscious of it, thinking about it in that way, but it is, it's just a daily practice. So taking something like that and ingraining it to the point that it is like a ingrained daily practice. I don't know. I think that just is constantly inspiring to me here, that's constantly inspiring to me here. Just dedication, the dedication involved, the devotion involved in spirituality, like the way people are devoted to what they do here.
Yeah, and point well taken, because literally the second line is the return from the graveyard, is celebration of a life well lived, part of our sacred traditions. And Christina said that very well. And now it's commercialized, because you can have a wedding, you can be coming in from New York, have a fancy wedding, and you're going to have a second line band. Well, that's okay, because that's how jazz grew. And Louis Armstrong writes eloquently about that in his autobiography, that's how musicians were paid. Literally, the social and pleasure clubs paid musicians to parade. So that dedication goes across the board. So thank you, Christina, for those words, because it is a dedication, and it's a dedication to tradition, sacred and secular, and how they blend.
Right.
And from the power of the Black church and where people worship, how they worship, do they worship, but everybody has their own thing, but they do themselves. And for me, coming up in the church, and I had the Baptist and the Catholic traditions, and I love worshiping with my family. And there's a lot of music, and they say if you praise the Lord in song, you're praying twice. So for us, music is, hey, it was in every family gathering, and it's in worship. It just depends on how you celebrate life. But to me, it's intrinsic, because certainly faith is what kept us. We've come this far. We've come this far by faith in ourselves, by faith in God, of course. And faith is strong here.
definitely something, Christina, that you said just made me think in my mind of like how so much of what we do, so much of our culture is a ritual. And, whether we realize it or not, it's instinct when you see these children second line and then have this footwork that you just have never seen anywhere else. It's instinct for us to gather and congregate when we hear music and we hear a bounce beat or we hear a drum. Even when you think about the tradition of Congo Square, it's, that is a spiritual practice. And I think, as Dr. Mona Lisa has mentioned, so much of our culture has been extracted and commercialized that people tend to forget that this is what saves us and has been the reason we have survived as long as we have, is our traditions and our cultures. And it's really not for play when you see the Black masking Indians and the second lines and the jazz funerals and the drumming in Congo Square. That's a ritual taking place. And these are things that we tap into instinctively, because it's part of who we are, it's part of our DNA. And even just the tradition of Congo Square, that being that place, that one place where we were able to congregate together. So to still have that tradition, simultaneously while being a Black Catholic city, being a Voodoo city, these are all these things that come together, and you see it a lot of times on a Sunday in New Orleans and in many households in New Orleans. And even the food that we make and when we sit down and eat, it is a ritual. And I think another aspect is just also that veneration of ancestors and how we hold up the people in our community that, have made tremendous impacts.
Absolutely. There's another question in the chat, and the questioner asks if you have engaged with N.K. Jemison's most recent novel, The City We Became, and if so, they're interested in hearing any reflections on her fictive metaphoric framing of disaster or catastrophe.
I can say something about catastrophe. I don't know that I think is interesting. I don't know. I see it as, something we're all like engaged in thinking about, I think culturally, at the moment. And I do hope that with that kind of conversation comes a real like serious visiting of like Katrina in a more close lens, because I think there's this notion that we've exhausted the narrative, but it really is like the half as yet to be told type of narrative. Like there's so many particularities of things that happen and how they shaped even national and global events, that we haven't even gotten close to talking about. Just the role of the role that the federal government, and many things played in the reconstruction of the demographics of the city. We know that 100,000 people didn't come back. We know certain neighborhoods flipped, 60-40 or even worse, even more extreme, but we don't really know what happened. We know what happened. So we know people got money based on the appraised value of their houses. So that's why all the houses in Lakeview are big now, and they weren't before Katrina, and the houses in the East are still vacant because people were awarded more money, based on their skin color, essentially, not how much they had to fix. And so I don't think that we've really even scratched the surface of like what that catastrophe was and how its practices emanated around the country. I know that wasn't the question, but the word kind of triggered me to think about that.
Thank you. I agree. Ditto to all of that. Amen.
I had to put that out there,
We have just a few minutes left. And I wanted to give everybody a chance to maybe say something about what they're working on next, what they're excited about next. I know I'm excited to hear, I was excited to hear all the things that you're working on, Dr. Saloy, and all the things to come, but would also love to hear from Christina and Cierra, and or maybe where can folks find you next?
So I'll say I've been doing a lot of reading and researching. I think, there's a whole bunch of books that I've added to my shelf that I've been trying to get through, and really taking the time to really dive into the research in ways I haven't been able to before, but then also thinking about how, given since 2020 and the pandemic, the typical ways that I would research came to a halt. I like to walk through the city and let the stories come to me. You stop and speak to somebody in the Treme, and that's how you start, gaining more insight on the piece that you're writing on, and going to different museums and going to the second lines and exhibits. And there's, as we're starting to see some of that come back, I've slowly been easing back into that, because I think that's what really fuels me and inspires me to want to create something. And I think it's been a while since New Orleans has felt like New Orleans, given the past year. So I'm excited for that, and really just letting the city speak to me, and keeping note and continuing to research.
Mm-hmm. Kind of similarly, I do have an article out right now that's in NOIR N America that's about sort of spirituality in New Orleans. So that's like something that's current that I'm doing right now. But I am sort of in this mode of like wanting to kind of really like go more deeply into certain things that I've explored in my writing, so I'm in this, like, I've done a lot of research or smaller writings about the West Coast of Africa, like particularly like Bambara culture and its influence on New Orleans and things like that. Like, that's things I've been able to touch on in my writing. But there's so much, every time you write a short piece, there's so much more you want to say. And I'm kind of trying to take some time to do some of that more, to write some of that like more, and let myself like write long and not think about pitching it anywhere, because I enjoy that process so much, that kind of, just free flowing process. So that's kind of where to look for me in the here, there, and everywhere, hopefully.
I love that.
Yeah.
And just to add, I have new work in the Chicago Quarterly Review that came out this year. And it was the anthology of Black American literature. And I'm happy to say I have 3 new pieces coming out in Obsidian.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm honored to be in that number. And the only reason I have a new collection of poems is because I live in a neighborhood. And I was just collecting all those voices. And baby, they gave me something to chew on. Serious as a heart attack. So I am thankful. I got a whole series called Lockdown Chronicles. It's, Me Too, even some Pride stuff. It's, the neighborhood is alive and well and fussing every day. And so it's a constant inspiration, because when I first returned, people say, well, why are you coming back? Why are you coming? Hello, where do I want to be? But with my folks, my cousin still lives around the corner, generations of neighbors. And let me tell you, one of my neighbors I grew up with, a kid, he gifted me with medallions over my light fixtures, because his folks and my folks, whenever his parents had another child, my dad would draw the plans, and he was a master carpenter, so he would help the master painter and plasterer add on to his house. So I have beautiful medallions I couldn't even afford. And he does $1 million homes. He's done Beyonce and her sister's stuff. These are actual medallions. That only happens in the Black community, gifted free. It's just, and we still get potato salad across the fence. I'm serious as a heart attack. It's still a neighborhood, and I'm so thankful for that. So we are alive and well and still kicking.
You all, this is a benediction. It truly is. Thank you all so much. Thank you for sharing space. Thank you, Kelsey, for moderating and producing behind the scenes. Thank you to the Space for Creative Black Imagination at MICA, Thayer Electric Marronage, Keywords for Black Louisiana, all Life Code projects, and the JHU Center for Africana Studies. Please find and follow these amazing dynamic women, and hopefully our paths cross sooner rather than later. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.